Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you very much for the invitation here. And for me, it's a great honor to be here and give this presentation. And when I was asked what are the main, let's say, forces which lead to, which will lead to the electoral patterns, specific electoral patterns in the 21st century, I decided to choose for my talk two topics. This is a polarization, which was discussed here, and terrorism. These are two really great challenges, and which might seriously influence democracy in 21st century. And I would like to go to, I will not present you formulas, although I would, I would love to do it, but just to explain you on the examples, how, and real examples and artificial examples, how these very topics might influence our behavior on the elections. So, concerning polarization, the main topics, main concerns are the existing communities, settlements, they are heterogeneous in terms of population. I don't like to go to the details why they are heterogeneous. This might be, for instance, half of the population support one football team, another one support another football team. But generally, you see, we have a heterogeneous population. On the other hand, migrants who come to our, or to Europe, they have also heterogeneous views. Again, I don't like to go to the details why it is the case, what kind of heterogeneity we observe. We have a demand on job market, naturally, for this. And important part of the story which should be taken into account in these very decisions concerning allocation of migrants is polarization. Whoops. No. So, we have settlements with initial distribution of population. We have initial polarization in these settlements. Migrants with their own distribution of polarization come. And polarization in settlements might change. And this allocation of migrants should take into account the problem of polarization change. In fact, you see this story about polarization in science, it was started to, no, thank you. It was started to be studied in 1970s. And there were presented several indices of polarization, and we developed a new one, which, from my point of view, it gives us better view on the system, because the classic indices of polarization presented by Esteban and Ray in Econometrica, they cannot be, it cannot be extended to multi-dimensional case, and polarization, from my point of view, has many dimensions, and it is a huge work for sociologists and political scientists to study this very problem. But I would like to give you one example. Oh, so I should wait a bit. Okay. So this is a graph which shows us, suppose we have settlements with only three types of views, A, B, and C. And here I use the classic left-right wing, for instance, scale, or any kind of scale which can position. Again, I would like to show you the simplest example. We can extend it to many dimensions, many cases, many views, but just for simple example, assume that you have only three different types of views, A, B, and C. And this is the left graph. We have distribution of population in percentages, and very small group supports the views of A, small group supports view of B, and C is the dominating group in this very settlement. So initial polarization, naturally, will be about 0, but I think I missed one very important slide. Okay, well, I will explain it in words. Maybe in the version which I sent you, there was not that. Okay, the idea is very simple. If we have this very distribution of polarization and we can measure it on the scale between 0 and 1, the worst case will be when the whole society is divided into two equal groups in the poles of this very scale. So people, half of the people support very right-wing views, the half of the people support very left-wing views, okay? In case, for instance, if everybody, you see, for instance, in the society supports very left-wing views, we cannot talk about polarization in the society. Maybe we do not accept it, we don't like it, but still the whole society is very homogeneous in its views, right? So the worst case is this polarization, and the mathematics, I have it, but I don't like to do it, to talk about it. So the highest level of polarization will be when this population is divided into two polarized groups, and it will be equal to 1. If everybody belongs to one group, despite of the, no matter what is the position on the scale, it is 0. You understand? There is no polarization independently of where this group is located. All of them, all people supports one view, okay? So, and in this very case, in the middle, in the graph on the middle, we have the evaluation of polarization in this very terminology for the left graph. It is about 0, okay? And suppose migrants of, the group of migrants come to this very settlement with the views located in B, okay? Then initial distribution is shown by blue columns. Distribution with migrants now will change the situation and we will have different story, okay? And we will have polarization, which is on the right scale, rather high. You understand? Because the migrants who came to this very settlement, they have different views from the general society in this very, community in this very settlement. And if we consider many settlements case, again, you see it's a kind of artificial example. We have 22 settlements with initial polarization, you see, only in one S6, it is rather high, 0.56. Generally, it's rather low, and these are number of people with different views, A, B, and C, in these very 22 communities. And in this many settlements case, suppose there are 11 groups of migrants whom we would like to allocate in different settlements. And we see their views, mainly their belong to group B or group C, okay? So, and I would like to show you that in case of the wrong allocation of migrants in the groups, we can have very undesirable consequences. Oops, no. Some kind of, sorry, but not all of these Something is lost, you see. Where is your computer? Okay, and I'm sorry, you see, it's strange, but some slides were lost. And we can evaluate this very case, and the situation might be the following, you see, and there was an example that in the wrong case of allocation, when we put migrants with opposite views to the settlements with other views, the level of polarization might go much above the case of 0.7. But if we do it accurately, we might get the level not above 0.4 or 0.5, which was, in fact, initial allocation, polarization with initial allocation. And this opens a serious problem which might be solved in, which is about how many migrants can accept country without increasing polarization above some level. And it is a pure mathematical problem without any, it might be solved easily. For instance, if we have, I don't know, 100,000, 10,000 settlements, we have, I don't know, 1 million migrants with different views, and we can calculate that will we be able to allocate 1 million people in these settlements without increasing polarization above some predefined level. And we can calculate to which extent how many people we can allocate without increasing this very level. This is very important story about allocation of migrants and acceptance of these groups into the countries. Okay, this is a part. If you have questions about this part, I will be ready to answer. And I would like to switch to terrorism. Doesn't work. May I ask you just to change the slide? But don't tell me that it is, there are no more slides.
Apologies about the technical difficulty. So we're having trouble communicating with the projector.
Okay, and a few years ago, I started to work in networks, and at that very time, I was asked to analyze the classical centrality indices of in networks, and I understood very interesting things that, for instance, I'd like to give you an example to understand this. We have a network, for instance, of people who borrowed money, or banks who borrowed money from other banks, and You understand that if I borrow $1 million from a big bank, from a large bank, and will not return it, bank will not be happy naturally, but it will not be crashed, right? But if I will borrow $1 million from the small bank and will not return it, it will be crashed, right? And this is very important part of the story because classic network measures do not take into account parameters of the vertices. And for me, when I started to study this very problem, it was really surprising because a classic person in this very field, Newman, wrote in his 2004 article, surveys, that the parameters of the nodes should be taken into account, but nobody did it. Another interesting thing is that the following. You see, I give you the example in terms of banks. It's clearly understood, but you can extend this example to other cases. For instance, if I and Adam will take money from this bank, small bank, $500,000 each, and if one of us will return, well, bank will not be happy, but still survive. But if we both will not return, it will be crashed. Which means that we have to take into account group influence of nodes to nodes. Understand? And nobody did it before. And now we created a whole huge set of models concerning this very parameters. And one more thing, that there are 2 or 3 models of centrality which take into account the long-distance interactions, but they do not fix it, you see. They generally take it into account, but in our models, we fix, for instance, 3 path of length 3 or 4, etc. You see, we can fix it. And when one of the applications was a global terrorism database, and in fact, you see, after 9/11, I thought that it is, well, tragedy, but I never thought that it is so active, still active. And we started to write this, to analyze this very data. There is a database, global terrorism database, and look here, from 2001 to 2016, there were more than 83,000 terrorist attacks in 158 countries. And we selected only 1,216 attacks which were made by several groups, 2 or more groups, not individual acts, you see, not acts made by individual group. Okay, so we had such kind of 1,216 attacks in 90 countries. Altogether, there are 426 groups. And can you imagine? It's a very depressive data. 11,000 plus victims. 11,000, more than 11,000, 111, sorry, not 11, 111,000 victims. Okay, and when we study, so we apply these new indices which I proposed and classic centrality measures. And I would like to show you very interesting picture. You see, this global terrorism connections of groups, and you can see at the very left upper corner graph in 2001, 2004, these very groups were not very well connected, you see. And look at the right down graph, how these very groups became connected in last few years. Okay, let's go further. Yeah, this is this way, oops. This is the network of this very last few years of terroristic groups. As I tell, it is 420-something groups. And let me show you the which groups are plays a role in these very countries. Please, next slide. So, and we constructed this network, and there are components. Components means that connected graph, which means that these terroristic events are made by these groups in these very countries. And look at the regions, 253 groups, Islamic ideology, separatist, ethnic, leftist, 24 plus attacks and 104 plus thousand victims. Can you imagine? And these are during the last few years. Component 2, again, they are working in, they are active in sub-Saharan Africa with 6,000. European group, anarchist group with 13 groups, only one victim. And you understand that it might be accidents. Okay, and other groups which are much less victims in this very case. Please, next slide. And after 9/11, I wrote an article about terrorism. It was published in 2 or 3 Russian journals, and I have some English text. My friends in Israel asked me, I sent them the translated text. And in that very article, I considered the political freedoms as resources. And there is a very famous work by Jim Buchanan, whom I had the honor to meet. He was a Nobel Prize winner, which is called, which I called it the dual version of Tragedy of Commons. Tragedy of Commons is a very well-known, proposed by David Hume in 300 years ago. And it deals with the following, you see. If you allow people, should I explain it in detail, or everybody knows what is a tragedy of commons? Okay, so I will go faster. In the tragedy of commons, if the resource can be used by everybody without any control, the resource is exhausted very fast. Okay? The dual version, which was proposed by Jim Buchanan, is the following. You see, if you have a resource and everybody can forbid the use of this resource, then resource will be underused. And it is a very great article, and I applied to this very notion to political freedoms, and discuss that under this terroristic activity, you see, many people might think that, you see, other groups or other organizations might be too liberal. They will try to forbid these very political freedoms, and they will be underused, you see. So, next slide, please. And I come almost to the end of my talk. The very idea is the following, you see. There is a polarization, there might be a polarization in terms of inequality, war, and we saw such kind of things, for instance, after the First World War, when there was a starvation, there was a declining of all institutions, inequality, etc. In this case, this is a hypothesis, but it is supported by, I read several books, you see, it is supported by this data. In this case, people prefer to vote for left-scale candidates. Why? Because left-scale usually offer equality, law, etc., but for everybody, everything for everybody. But in this in the case of polarization is, as we saw in these very 2 examples, migration and terrorist attacks, we are under threat to lose our basic values. As you see, we lose the very idea of safety. And then we come back to this story about Maslow's pyramid, or Yuval Harari's work on the safety, which was one of the leading drives to organize society. We come to the case that people will vote for Rightscale candidates for the following reason. You see, Rightscale is a conservative scale, and it will suggest us some kind of safety, you see, some kind of returning to basic values, Eric Adelstein just gave us examples what is going on in Europe in different places, and there is a clear, let's say, signs that people are moving to the right. Here I would like to stop and, well, maybe just a few words about Maslow pyramid. It was a great work of sociologist and philosopher in 1950. First his article was published in 1943, I think. He was American sociologist and philosopher. And the book was published in 1954, as far as I remember. And he constructs pyramid saying that the needs of human being can be divided into basic needs, so-called physiological needs, then comes safety, then comes belonging to the group, love, belonging to the group, he explained, esteem and self-actualization. And by these very examples, I did like to show that the very idea of safety might be somehow disturbed, you see, and this move to the right might be exact reaction to these very cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Aleskerov, despite all the technical problems. And now we have space for a few questions.
I'm ready to answer.
Okay. The side. Oh, yeah.
Perhaps I don't need one. Hello, my name is Zdeněk Burak. I'm a professor of cybernetics at Czech Technical University. So I have a few technical questions. In the first part of your talk, you presented some studies with the results that concluded some influence of migration of immigration and polarization in society. You suggested that there's some great work. I was just wondering, I was curious how you validated, because you also mentioned that these conclusions are based on some artificial data and some models. So I was just wondering how you validated your, say, mathematical conclusions against the reality. So that's the first question. I perhaps will state also the second one. In the second part of your talk, you showed some analysis of evolution of connectedness of networks of terrorists. Right? So I was just wondering what the connection here meant. What does it mean that groups of terrorists are connected? Does it mean that they know each other in person, that they've met?
No. Let me start with the answer to the second question. It doesn't mean that they know each other. They made collective terrorist attacks. This very data is not about they know each other or live in the same city, etc. They made joint attacks. So it is from database. Concerning the first question, as I told, it is a business of sociologists to check, but first of all, we did some work. They are somehow published, some of them still not, concerning polarization in Russian parliament, in American Congress, and in European Parliament. And in this very case, we naturally look at the political maps, real political maps of these parliaments, and evaluate this very polarization. In the case of migrants, as I told you, these are artificial data, but saying that this group has these views A, view B, and view C. As I told you, I don't like to go now to the discussion of details. But if two groups are supported different football teams, it will be polarization. You understand? But if one group is very small, the other one is very big, it will not be so great polarization. But if the society is split, but you can consider any kind of view over which it might be split. And moreover, I gave you examples, they are simple, on one-dimensional case. In fact, the situation is multidimensional. You see, people might have very different views on different things. Thank you.
Other questions?
My name is Jana Hibashkova, and I had the pleasure to spend more than 9 years working in Iraq on stabilization of Iraq and similar processes across the Middle East. You speak about the polarization as a way from 1 to 0 in the destruction scheme. And when we try to engage in the way out, that means the reverse processes, do you have any statistics concerning the amount? If you have 50 on 50, then you have full polarization. Then this event happens, and you have the post-event situation when we all try to understand what is the multiplication factor to get from 0 to 1 in amount of communities, amount of engaged, and of course in amount of time. Do you have any guidance on the way out? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I would like to say that it's a rather very new work. You see, so I did not talk about with sociologists concerning this, and really, you see, we need a very, let's say, extensive analysis of the groups, of the situations, etc. But where we can apply it, I'm a mathematician, don't forget about it, where we can apply it to the situations when we have data. And the data usually is rather easily can be observed from political theory, not about polarization in terms of in settlements, but rather about polarization in political views in societies. And as I told you, we did this work for American Congress, Russian Parliament, and it is very interesting to observe. We published it. In fact, you see, I don't remember in working papers somewhere, and we are going to publish it as an article. It is very interesting to observe that in different periods, how, for instance, American Congress is more polarized than comparing with other periods. For instance, I don't remember exactly, maybe I'm wrong, but we have these evaluations. During Barack Obama period, for instance, polarization was a bit higher. But again, you see, it was never go above 0.35, something like that, you see, never. In the Russian parliament, for instance, is the worst periods, it goes about 0.5, not more.
And one last question.
Yes,
Just a very quick question. You spoke about this global terrorist database. If I understood well, this is a database you built at your university, right? Is it accessible? Is it possible to use it?
Yeah, it is open data. It's absolutely open data. I have a reference in my articles. I don't remember now. It is collected by some, I think, Britain University, but I'm not sure. And it is absolutely open. You can go there and look at every data about this, who did these attacks, how many people were killed, etc., etc.